The wrestling world just got turned upside down in ways nobody saw coming. One moment everything was locked in place, and the next moment, chaos erupted from every angle. Brock Lesnar made his shocking entrance into a vision that changes everything. Seth Rollins suffered a brutal injury that forced everyone to scramble and rearrange their plans. John Cena appeared and absolutely stunned the entire wrestling community with his presence, and in the middle of all this confusion, Wargames got cancelled. If you haven't heard about this yet, you absolutely need to stick around because we're breaking down every single detail of what just happened backstage and on camera. Make sure you subscribe because we're going to be covering all the latest developments in this insane saga, and you won't want to miss a single update about where this is all heading. The entire foundation of what everyone thought was happening in professional wrestling just collapsed. For weeks, wrestlers and fans alike were preparing for a specific narrative. The storylines were set, the matchups were confirmed, and everyone knew what to expect when they tuned in. But then Brock Lesnar decided that the vision everyone was following wasn't good enough anymore. He showed up and immediately announced that he had a completely different direction in mind. This wasn't just another surprise appearance or a quick return. Lesnar came with a message and a purpose that would shake the entire roster to its core. The way he positioned himself suggested that he wasn't just another competitor in the mix. He was there to change the entire landscape of what was happening. When Lesnar made his announcement about his new vision, the locker room fell silent. Veterans who had seen everything before were shocked. This wasn't a typical Lesnar appearance where he shows up, delivers a few statements, and then disappears for a while. This was different. He had allies. He had a plan. He had something that would disrupt every single storyline that had been carefully crafted over the previous months. The details of his vision included partnerships that nobody expected. He was aligning himself with people that fans thought would never work together. The chemistry seemed unlikely, but Lesnar has always operated on a level that defies conventional logic. What made this moment even more intense was that Lesnar didn't just announce his vision and leave. He demonstrated it. He showed the roster exactly what his plan entailed by engaging in physical confrontations that left multiple wrestlers questioning their own positions in the company. Some of the biggest names backstage suddenly found themselves reassessing where they stood in the hierarchy. If Lesnar was making his move, then everyone else had to figure out what their next step was going to be. The vision he was promoting wasn't just about championship titles or personal feuds. It was about control. It was about power. It was about restructuring the entire way professional wrestling operated at the highest level. The first real indication that something was seriously wrong came when Seth Rollins got injured. Rollins had been positioned as one of the central figures in the major storylines heading into the biggest events. He was scheduled for multiple matches and had been building momentum that suggested he was going to be one of the main attractions. But in a shocking turn of events, Rollins suffered an injury that was serious enough to remove him from competition. The injury happened during a physical altercation backstage that wasn't even supposed to be a full contact situation. It was supposed to be a tense confrontation between two figures, but things escalated far beyond what was planned. When word got out that Rollins was injured, the entire company went into damage control mode. Producers who had been working on storylines for months suddenly had to scrap their plans. Matches that had been advertised were going to have to be changed or cancelled entirely. The momentum that Rollins had been building would have to be transferred to someone else, or worse, completely abandoned. This injury created a ripple effect that touched every single department of the wrestling organization. Writers had to rewrite segments. Wrestlers had to adjust their storylines. Promoters had to figure out how to market events when one of your top stars is sidelined. The injury was devastating not just for Rollins personally, but for the entire company's plans moving forward. The timing of Rollins' injury was particularly cruel because it happened right when things were supposed to be reaching a climax. He was involved in multiple storylines that were all supposed to converge on the same event. Now, none of that could happen. Wrestlers who had been feuding with Rollins had to find new opponents or new directions for their stories. The momentum that had been building for weeks was interrupted. Some wrestlers took advantage of this chaos and tried to position themselves as the new centerpiece of the narrative. Others found themselves pushed to the side because there simply weren't enough spots available once Rollins was removed from the equation. Backstage officials were scrambling to figure out how long Rollins would be absent. If it was just a few weeks, they could hold the line and keep some storylines on pause. If it was longer, they would have to make significant changes to their plans. The injury assessment suggested it was serious enough that Rollins wouldn't be able to return for at least several months. This meant that everything that had been planned around Rollins had to be completely restructured. The company had to make hard decisions about which storylines were worth salvaging and which ones should be abandoned entirely. In the middle of all this chaos, something completely unexpected happened. John Cena showed up. And when I say he showed up, I mean he arrived with an intensity and purpose that had fans and wrestlers alike absolutely stunned. Cena's presence at this particular moment couldn't have been timed more dramatically. He appeared exactly when the company needed someone to take control of the situation and provide some stability. The way he carried himself suggested that he wasn't there just for a guest appearance or a nostalgia moment. He had something to say, and he had something to do. Cena's entrance was methodical and deliberate. He made his way through the arena in a way that commanded everyone's attention. Wrestlers stopped what they were doing to watch him. Fans erupted because seeing Cena in this context was shocking. He had been away from regular competition, and his sudden return at this exact moment seemed almost providential. When Cena finally grabbed the microphone and started speaking, his words carried weight. He wasn't just making a casual statement. He was making a declaration. He was declaring his intent to be involved in whatever was happening with Lesnar's new vision. What Cena said during his promo absolutely floored everyone who was watching. He acknowledged the chaos that was happening. He acknowledged the injury to Rollins. He acknowledged that everything was falling apart. But then he delivered a statement that suggested he had been planning this return for a while. He indicated that he had something to prove and that the current situation was the perfect opportunity for him to prove it. The way he positioned himself against Lesnar's newfound power structure suggested that there was going to be a collision between these two massive forces. Cena's return wasn't just about him getting involved in the current drama. It was about him fundamentally changing who was in control. The wrestling community absolutely lost it when Cena made his intentions clear. Social media exploded with speculation about what would happen next. Fans who had been disappointed by recent events suddenly had hope again. The idea of Cena going up against Lesnar's vision and his new allies created countless possible storylines. Everyone wanted to know who Cena would align himself with and what his master plan was. Would he try to restore the old order that existed before Lesnar's arrival? Would he try to create something completely new? The questions were endless, and the possibilities seemed limitless. What really blew everyone away was that Cena brought his own group with him. He didn't show up alone to face this situation. He had allies that he had been cultivating away from the camera. These were wrestlers that fans didn't even know Cena had connections with. They emerged from the back with him, and suddenly, the entire dynamic shifted again. Now it wasn't just Cena versus Lesnar. It was Cena's faction versus Lesnar's faction. The chess match was on another level. Every move one side made had to be calculated because the other side had equally powerful pieces on the board. In the midst of all this maneuvering, the announcement came down that Wargames was being cancelled. This was one of the most shocking decisions of the entire situation. Wargames was supposed to be a massive spectacle that would feature some of the biggest names in professional wrestling. It was supposed to be the event where multiple storylines would come to a head. It was supposed to generate significant revenue for the company. But given the chaos that was now unfolding, the decision was made to cancel it entirely. The official statement was vague, but everyone knew the real reason. The company couldn't put together a coherent card for Wargames when everything was in such turmoil. The cancellation of Wargames sent shockwaves through the entire wrestling world. Fans who had been planning to attend the event were devastated. Wrestlers who had been preparing for their matches suddenly found themselves without an event to perform on. The cancellation also created logistical nightmares for everyone who had been hired to work the event. But more importantly, it signaled to everyone that the situation was serious. The company wasn't going to force through an event just to maintain their schedule. They were going to take the time to figure out what was actually going to happen. The cancellation meant that Lesnar's vision, Rollins' injury, Cena's return, and Lesnar's new alliance now had breathing room. None of them had to come to a head at Wargames. Instead, the timeline became undefined. Wrestlers could take their time developing their storylines. The company could make adjustments as situations evolved. Some people saw this as a missed opportunity for immediate payoff. Others recognized that this gave the company a chance to build something bigger and more meaningful than what they had originally planned. Backstage meetings went into overdrive. Producers, writers, and executives were constantly gathering to discuss the new direction. They had to figure out what the endgame was for each of these major storylines. What was Lesnar really trying to accomplish? How would Rollins' injury affect the long-term plans? What did Cena's return actually mean for the company's future? These weren't questions that could be answered quickly. They required careful consideration and strategic planning. One of the most interesting developments was that Lesnar's vision started to become clearer as the days went on. His new direction wasn't just about destroying the existing order. It was about creating something that had never existed before in professional wrestling. He was proposing a structure that would have given him and his allies unprecedented power. The way his plan was designed, it would have completely altered the hierarchy of the company. Some wrestlers would have been elevated to positions they had never dreamed of reaching. Others would have been completely removed from any meaningful position. Cena's counter-strategy was equally interesting. He wasn't trying to restore the old order. He was also trying to create something new, but his vision was fundamentally different from what Lesnar was proposing. Cena's vision seemed to be about creating more opportunities for wrestlers who had been overlooked. He wanted to democratize the power structure instead of concentrating it in the hands of a few elite figures. This created a genuine philosophical conflict between the two factions that went beyond just personal animosity. The wrestlers caught in the middle of this situation had to make some difficult choices. They had to decide which vision they believed in. Did they want to follow Lesnar's path of concentrated power? Did they want to follow Cena's path of distributed opportunity? Some wrestlers made their decisions immediately. Others waited to see how things would develop. A few clever wrestlers played both sides, trying to position themselves as valuable to both factions so that they would be safe no matter who ended up winning this battle. The media was having a field day with all of this. News outlets that normally didn't cover professional wrestling were suddenly interested in the drama that was unfolding. The storyline had transcended the typical wrestling fan base and was reaching mainstream audiences. People who had never watched wrestling before were tuning in because the human drama was so compelling. The company was getting free promotion from unexpected places, and the buzz around professional wrestling was reaching levels that hadn't been seen in quite a while. Fan theories started circulating about what would happen next. Some people thought this was all leading to a massive pay-per-view event that would pit Cena and Lesnar against each other in a winner-take-all match. Others thought this was the beginning of a long-term storyline that would play out over many months. A few people theorized that this was all part of a bigger plan to shake things up and make professional wrestling feel fresh and unpredictable again. The speculation was endless, and no one could definitively say what would actually happen. The impact on the wrestlers themselves was significant. Guys who had been stuck in their positions for years suddenly found themselves with new opportunities. Wrestlers who had been considered main event talent were now questioning their status. The entire card had to be re-evaluated. Some wrestlers climbed in importance while others fell. The interviews backstage were tense. Everyone was trying to figure out where they stood in this new reality that was emerging. Lesnar's new allies were revealed to be some of the most talented wrestlers on the roster. These weren't fringe players trying to get attention. These were legitimate main event level talent who had apparently been working with Lesnar behind the scenes for months. When they finally stepped into the light and revealed their allegiance, it confirmed that Lesnar's vision wasn't some impulsive decision. It was something that had been carefully planned and orchestrated. The coordination between these wrestlers was flawless, and their in-ring chemistry was undeniable. Cena's allies brought their own unique skill sets to the table. They had been positioned as mid-card talent, but with Cena backing them, they suddenly seemed like main event material. The company was investing significant resources into elevating these wrestlers. They were getting better microphone time. They were getting better opponents. They were getting positioned for success. Cena's backing gave them credibility that they hadn't possessed before. The contrast between these two factions was fascinating. Lesnar's crew represented tradition and dominance. They were focused on control and power. They wanted to maintain the mystique of being larger-than-life figures that other wrestlers had to fear. Cena's crew represented accessibility and opportunity. They wanted to break down the barriers that had been constructed. They wanted to make professional wrestling feel like something that anyone could aspire to become. As time went on, small incidents kept happening that suggested the conflict between these two factions was escalating. There were backstage encounters that were tense but stopped short of actual violence. There were promos where wrestlers took shots at each other through barely veiled insults. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone could sense that something big was going to happen, but no one knew exactly when or where it would take place. The company's officials were working overtime trying to ensure that the situation didn't spiral completely out of control. They understood the value of this storyline, but they also understood the risks. If things got too chaotic, it could damage the wrestlers involved or create actual injuries that weren't part of the plan. There was a delicate balance that had to be maintained between creating compelling television and maintaining the safety and well-being of everyone involved. Rollins' status remained a topic of constant discussion. Every time there was an update about his condition, it sent ripples through the wrestling community. If he was progressing faster than expected, it changed the timeline for certain events. If there were setbacks, it meant that plans had to be pushed back even further. The wrestling world was essentially holding its breath waiting to see when Rollins would return and what role he would play in this new landscape. Cena occasionally hinted that Rollins was going to be a key part of his plans when Rollins was ready to return. This created an interesting dynamic because it meant that three major players would eventually be involved in this conflict. Lesnar's vision, Cena's counter-vision, and Rollins' unknown allegiances would create a three-way chess match of enormous complexity. When Rollins finally returned, the entire situation would be transformed once again. The wrestling fans were eating this up. Attendance numbers were up. Television ratings were up. The merchandise that featured the wrestlers involved in this conflict was flying off the shelves. The company had accidentally stumbled onto something that truly captivated audiences in a way that had been missing for quite some time. This wasn't manufactured drama. This felt real. The emotions that the wrestlers were displaying felt genuine. The conflicts between the factions seemed to matter on a fundamental level. Interviews with wrestlers away from the cameras revealed that the cast of characters was invested in making this storyline work. They understood the importance of what was happening. They were putting in extra effort to make sure that every interaction felt meaningful. The backstage segments were being shot with more care and attention. Every promo was being crafted to maximum effect. This was professional wrestling at a high level, with talented performers who understood how to create compelling stories. As the weeks went on, the anticipation reached a fever pitch. The company announced that they would be holding a special event to address the chaos. This event would bring together representatives from both factions. It would give them a chance to lay out their visions for the future of professional wrestling. This was going to be a watershed moment. The decisions made at this event would fundamentally shape what happened next. The build-up to this special event dominated every conversation in the wrestling world. People were speculating about what would be announced. Some thought there would be matches announced for a new pay-per-view. Others thought Rollins would make his return. A few people thought that this would be the moment where one faction would gain a decisive advantage over the other. The mystery was intoxicating. No one could predict what would actually happen. When the special event finally took place, it delivered beyond anyone's expectations. The revelations that came out during this event changed the entire trajectory of the storyline once again. Lesnar made declarations about his long-term plans. Cena responded with declarations of his own. Other wrestlers stepped up and pledged their allegiance or made their own declarations of independence. The event was a masterclass in professional wrestling storytelling. The aftermath of the special event created new questions that demanded answers. The revelation that had been made suggested that this conflict was going to extend far beyond what anyone had initially thought. It wasn't just about who controlled the company in the short term. It was about setting the foundation for an entirely new era of professional wrestling. Both factions seemed to understand this, and both were committed to winning this battle because the stakes were so incredibly high. This is one of the most important wrestling stories that has unfolded in quite some time. The involvement of massive names like Brock Lesnar and John Cena combined with the shocking injury to Seth Rollins and the cancellation of Wargames has created a perfect storm of drama and intrigue. The way this saga continues to unfold will determine the direction of professional wrestling for potentially years to come. Everything that happens in the wrestling world right now is connected to this central conflict. If you want to stay updated on every development in this incredible story, you absolutely have to subscribe to this channel. We are covering every single update about what Lesnar's vision actually is, how Rollins' recovery is progressing, what Cena's counterplan looks like, and where all of this is heading in the future. The wrestling world is changing before our eyes, and you won't want to miss a single moment of it. Subscribe right now so that you can be part of this journey as it unfolds.